Hackers and hacking. Probably when you're watching this webinar, you'll have some sort of association of what they are and what they do, maybe even. But what are they really, and why do they attack us like this, and how can we harness their power? Well, let's first take a look at some of the trends, right? What we saw back in 2017 is that from all the reported incidents, the most frequent attack vector was actually web applications. And that is especially interesting considering that nowadays we work a lot more from home and we're getting all these web applications that we use as an interface to do our daily work. Also within healthcare, right? Chatting with our patients, for example, is becoming more commonplace. So these web applications are the biggest part that led up to actual incidents. But you'll see the things that you'll probably hear about in the news are also significantly smaller. So for example, losing assets or cyber espionage. What I really like in this graph is the everything else. I'm still wondering what it is. Nonetheless, very interesting research to look in and just dive through the numbers a bit. Because if we zoom in on the 21% of the web applications, we'll see that 90% of the breaches through web applications actually happened within the healthcare sector. And I'm estimating that it will probably grow as well because it's such a valuable target for hackers. But yeah, security, it's so relevant, not just within healthcare, but basically for anyone who touches a computer or anyone who uses a somewhat smart device, anyone who has internet connection. But it often feels so really far away, right? And there's mentions of APT, steganography, social engineering, threat actors, critical vulnerabilities. But you cannot really deal with this technical mumbo jumbo if you're not a first and cannot understand what they mean. So during this talk, we'll cover what these hackers are, especially why they hack, not necessarily in-depth technical, but just to get a grasp on what are these hackers doing and why would they be targeting us and what can we do about it. So yes, they may be criminal, but most of the hackers will just be focused on their curiosity. They hack because they can and they do not necessarily intend any harm. So why bother with this topic? Well, it's also becoming both more malicious but also more accessible. That nowadays teenagers, when they grow up, they just Google hack website and they'll come to many forums that will just give them basic tutorials on how to hack certain stuff, which can be really, really interesting, but it also means that in the years to come, the number of hackers, whether they're good or evil, will also grow. That means that we need to better understand the playing field, what we're dealing with, in order to effectively protect ourselves. So we're also going to cover why it's not necessarily only technical, but it's also about human nature and how human nature can also be exploited by a hacker. And it's really important to keep in mind that although it can be really cool, it can be scary because it can happen anywhere, but also keep in mind that people who fall for a hacking attempt or developers who do not securely develop something are not necessarily stupid. They just never intended something like that could happen. And that's a mindset issue. And that is what we have to tackle. My name is Hugo. I have been with Outpost for the past 3 years, in the industry for almost 10 years. So yes, I used to do lots of hands-on hacking, but nowadays I more focus on managing the team and doing presentations like these to raise security awareness and spread the word on security. So let's start out with a very simple definition that still holds today on what is really a hacker. Well, simply put, it's someone who thinks outside of the box. If a hacker sees a system, they will not just use it for what it's intended to do. It will try to circumvent the system. It will try to make it do something else that it's not intended to do. They do not follow the paths, they create new paths and they follow those. So if they have a smart fridge that just reports, hey, you're running out of milk, they will hack it and they'll try to run a web browser on it or watch videos on it. Why? In most cases, because they can. But let's take a look back, just a few years back, on how hacking has become to what it is today and how it evolved over the years. In the year 499 before Christ, actually saw the first version of steganography. Histiaeus, a Greek ruler or tyrant, he wanted to send a message to one of his subjects, and he did this by getting his slave, shaving his head, tattooing the message on the back of his head, and then waiting for the hair to grow back. So yeah, no one could tell that he had a message. So he just walked through all the security that they had, and he could send his message across. Now, it's a very good example of early ages cryptography. But I must say, I'm pretty happy that it's more efficient nowadays, right? You don't want to set up a connection to a website, wait 2 months for someone's hair to grow back before a secure connection can be set up. If we jump back a few, or forward a few eras, we'll see in 1903 that Marconi created the wireless telegraph. So he was the first to ever send what he claimed secure and private messages across a long distance. Now, Neville Maskelyne back then, effectively a hacker, but magician at the time, figured out a way to send his own messages. So while Marconi is doing this public demonstration, Neville would actually send a message to make fun of Marconi and his telegraph and his claims that it was secure and private, because it was not. Nonetheless, the telegraph took off, but still a nice feat of hacking by Neville. And what we saw in the 1960s, there was a lot of phone phreaking going on. A great example of that is Captain Crunch, or John Draper. And what he realized is that he could make free long-distance phone calls by whistling into the horn of a phone. So you had the dial tones, they had a really specific tone, and he figured out, hence the nickname, that the frequency that you need is the exact same frequency that a whistle that comes as a surprise in a Captain Crunch cereal box could be used to make those long-distance phone calls for free. A few years later, he did get convicted because, it's still illegal, but it was a nice hacking feat. Later on, this also got monetized by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who realized, well, they basically took his idea and they hacked it. They said, well, it's too difficult to be whistling with a phone and start whistling into the horn. So they created the blue box and basically monetized the idea. In 1988, we saw that hacking becomes a bit more malicious. It was Robert Morris who released the now famous Morris worm inside the MIT network. And this was the first ever piece of malware that actually was able to spread itself, a worm, through the network and infect other machines. You should imagine that back in the day, one of the worst kinds of viruses that could happen was a small ambulance driving across your screen. But this worm, not only did it shut down systems that were infected, but he was also able to propagate itself through the network, which has never happened before. So you can imagine the shock that that created back in 1988. In 89 and 92, we see a more malicious use of hacking, where basically we saw a revamp of the old phone phreaking hacks. But what Kevin Poulsen figured out is that he was able to hack the phone system at radio shows to make sure that every time that he called, he would be the magical caller. So often at these radio shows, you had to be caller number 10. And he would make sure that each time that he called, he would be number 10 and no one else would be put through. In doing so, he won a Porsche, multiple trips to Hawaii, and $50,000 in cash. And he got obviously convicted for that. So we see a more malicious turn coming to hacking here as well. Now in 2014, we saw a rise in hacktivism. So you might have heard about Anonymous, a hacker collective that, well, basically forced their political message onto anyone who wouldn't want to listen. So they would organize through social media large-scale attacks, also against the payment card industry and other targets. And for example, LulzSec, the image in the middle, was a splinter group from Anonymous that, is very well known for hacking the Sony Entertainment network. leaking movies, leaking code of games. And you might wonder the last one, the NSA. Back in 2014, they had a massive breach in which tools were leaked from the hacking group, the TSO hacking group, that worked for the NSA. So inside the NSA, although they're a government entity, they of course have their own hackers, right, and their own tools, and those were leaked around 2014. So they were also, actually exposed or confirmed that, there's also federal hacking teams out there, and it's not just, well, kids in basements hacking things. Now in 2017 and onwards, we're still really seeing that a lot today. We see the rise of ransomware. I think Maersk is a really interesting example. It's the container shipping company. And back in 2017, you had the NotPetya outbreak. And basically what happened, from being a digitally enabled company, they were thrown back into, well, not the Middle Ages, but back to paper and pen, right? They had to go back to manually checking which container had to go on which ship, which is a really hard feat if you're so used to working with IT and relying on IT as well. So that's really where ransomware made its grand entrance. Now, if you look at a typical terminal like this, you see all those containers, and what a lot of people don't realize is the massive amount of automation that goes on. So underneath those large cranes that you see here on the screen, there is huge robotic cars driving around, or trucks rather, that the containers are loaded onto, and they know to which crane to drive, and then the crane operator can pick them up and put them on a ship. Now, Maersk, for example, had to load 20,000 of these containers per day without IT, so no one knew which container had to go where at what time. So they actually had people manually reprogramming those cranes and those machines to get the entire company back up and running, and had a massive impact. If you want to learn more about this, I would refer to the Darknet Diaries podcast episode 54, where it goes into a lot of detail on how disruptive such a digital attack can be on our lives nowadays. We also see nowadays that a lot of vulnerabilities get these, well, interesting names. For example, Bluekeep allows you to fully compromise outdated Windows systems, which, well, even nowadays is prevalent, right? If a hacker finds this, they'll get in. It's game over. How can it be remediated? Update or take the system offline? Pretty simple, but if you do not know that this vulnerability is out there, or that you have systems running that are vulnerable to this, it's hard to remediate. We also see a lot, so for example, here you have Crook and the Frag attack, just names and images that attacks in theory can be really cool. I mean, if you read the descriptions for all these attacks, you probably don't even want to turn on the Wi-Fi on your phone anymore, or have your Wi-Fi shut down at home. But you should keep in mind that even if an attack has a cool image and a nice name, it is not necessarily applicable in a real-world scenario. So you can more or less accept this risk and wait for an automated update to fix something for you, than no longer wanting to go to sleep because of these new vulnerabilities that might have an impact on you. So some risks we just got to accept. But what are these hackers? Well, if you ask Google, what is a hacker? You'll see all these images, of course, on the top right. That's us in the office. We all wear balaclavas, but I figured for this presentation I'll take them off. If you believe the media, in most cases, it's this, right? It's probably a guy, a teen with a hoodie and this mask, and belonging to Anonymous and hacking all the things that they don't agree with. Yeah, to a certain degree, very true. But they might not be the most skilled hackers, because the most skilled hackers you probably do not see and have no idea what they look like. If you follow the stereotype, this is it, right? A bigger guy living in the basement of his parents, smoking and drinking all day and just sitting on a computer and being in chat rooms, making fun of people. Is he a hacker? Maybe, could be. If he likes tinkering with things and things outside of the box, it definitely is a hacker. Now to me, this could also be a hacker. As a matter of fact, this is what we call the cloak of invisibility. And this is one of our most frequently used disguises, because if you wear something like this, you psychologically trigger a person to avoid you or ignore you because, hey, you're wearing this jacket. In this case, you're holding up a sign, so you probably belong there. Well, exactly such a jacket and a leather was all it took for my colleagues and myself to break into a bank. Once you're inside, change your appearance, and then come out of the bathroom as a banker, and you're in. And how do you get in? Well, simply follow the group of smoking people, blend in, have a chat, have a laugh, and tailgate them inside. It can be that easy, right? If you look like you belong somewhere, you can just blend in. But there's different kind of hackers. If you look at the media, if you look at mainstream messaging, it's most probably the black hats, right? They do not have permission to hack anything, and they have criminal intentions. So they're after your information, your data, or they just want to disrupt your business. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the white hat hackers. That's hackers like myself. We have permission of the organization to perform a hack, and with the outcome will help strengthen the organization. So there is no criminal intent, but the largest group probably is the gray hat hackers. People who do it for fun, or people who accidentally discover something. They need a proper way to disclose this information to you, to your organization, to help you remediate, because they don't have criminal intent. They just happen to find a vulnerability inside your organization. So the question then is, how do you treat them? Well, if you ask me, you should reward them, or at least acknowledge them and thank them for their time and effort, and fix the vulnerability. Now, as we also noticed from these different examples, is that hacking is never just digital. And that is something even IT security professionals struggle with, is that digital security is completely separate from the physical security, which often physical security is the reception and security guard, and digital security is all bits and bytes. And then we have human security, which, well, we often see coming back in like a annual awareness training. Yeah, but that's not going to cut it. If it's as easy for an attacker, a targeted attacker, a motivated attacker, to just physically walk into your office, just smile and wave to the receptionist, walk into your server room, and then plug in something there, or just steal a server, yeah, then you don't need to attack any organization through the internet. You just waltz in, you take whatever you need, and you're out again. Hackers will take the path of least resistance to get what they want. So different ways of hackers. It can be physical, it can be digital / physical. I mean, whenever you visit a hotel, just remember there's always a Ethernet port hidden probably behind your TV, or you're connected to a Wi-Fi network, maybe different Wi-Fi networks. Where do they lead you? And if all else fails and you cannot open a door, well, then just be like my colleague on the right. And just use what we call under the door tool. You slid it under the door, and then you pull it up, and then it will latch on the door handle, and you can open the door from the inside. Now, what you also notice here is that we actually had to hack the hacking tool because of the handle was so curved. It couldn't really grip, so we had to put some grip tape on top of the loop to make sure it catches properly. But yeah, the short version, your security never stops at the front door, right? There's different angles, there are different ways in, there's different techniques, and you need to apply the hacker mindset to identify these attack paths. Now, I already talked a bit about sophistication and how persistent an attacker will be. Most of the attacks will be really opportunistic. As a matter of fact, it takes around 7 minutes to scan the entire internet for a particular port or a particular vulnerability. That doesn't mean that hackers are after you. No, if you happen to have that vulnerability, you'll probably get hacked. That's the way it works. Whenever a new vulnerability comes out, hackers will start massively start scanning the internet for this particular vulnerability. So just make sure that this low-hanging fruit at least is cut off for these hackers, and that they don't just accidentally stumble into your organization. And for the more targeted attackers, it needs to be a risk assessment. Should you really care who would target you, and how likely is it that you'll be targeted? One thing to keep in mind though is that it's always an unequal battle, right? The attackers have all the time that they need to reach their objectives, and a budget to fit their purpose. I mean, there's no use for a small company to try and protect against advanced persistent threats like state-sponsored hackers. Yeah, you can't cope with that. Those risks can be accepted, but it will, no matter the size of a company, be an equal fight. And we need to just keep that in mind and work within the boundaries that we have. But why do hackers really hack? Well, the answer is a bit lackluster maybe, and really simple. They will take anything they can get their hands on to sell it. So whether it's personal information, it's credit cards, it's passports, but especially personal health information. This can be really valuable and can be resold on the dark web. And these dark web markets have been around since even the 2000s, when they were still on the regular internet, like Carter Market on the left and Silk Road were the more well-known name. They were used to actually sell credit cards already, and later on with Silk Road and the introduction of the dark web and Toorn, it becomes more nefarious, right? They would sell anything that cannot be sold in daily life, because it's online and it's anonymous. Now, of course, it was taken down, Silk Road. Of course, hackers be hacking. There you have Silk Road 2.0, which was up for a little while and then got taken down again. And then you got Alphabet, and then you got Hansa Market. And you see this cascading effect of markets. And that's a constant cat and mouse game also between law enforcement and malicious hackers who are trying to facilitate or directly sell their stolen goods, right? Stolen credit cards have to be laundered as well. Yeah, some types of information that they sell here, but especially again the personal health information is really beneficial. If you can sell someone enough to create a fake profile, request a bank account or a credit card, that information is golden and is traded for the probably most value. But besides, this information, they also sell, for example, access. So if your organization is accidentally hacked, the hacker might not even utilize this access, but they would just sell it on the dark web for anyone. Hey, you're looking for access inside this company. This is the amount, pay me, and I'll get you the access. Phishing kits, even with a help desk. So if you're trying to phish someone and send millions of emails, for 50 euros, you can buy a full phishing kit, including a service desk. So if you can't really figure it out, just give them a ring and they'll help you out. Amazing customer service. Maybe even some companies can learn from them. But if you need it, it's out there on the dark web and it's value for someone. So hackers will just grab anything they can to make a buck. And the reason is very, very simple. As long as we keep paying and the attacks, even for the low-hanging fruits, keep paying off, then it's worthwhile for a hacker to just try. Sending millions of emails is not that hard. And it's just this small percentage of people that need to click. And again, people who click on, for example, phishing emails are not stupid. The email just reached them in the right moment while they were in the right state of mind. And the email had the right content and it matched up with the user, so they clicked. Just assume within any company, there's always someone who clicks. It's more about being able to detect this then and to minimize the damage that it could do by adequately following up, instead of punishing people and trying to make sure that no one clicks, because trust me, that will not happen. There will always be someone. But should we really be worrying? No. And let that be the key takeaway of this presentation. If you worry too much about anything that can go wrong, you cannot even go outside of your house. You cannot do anything. Some risks should just be accepted. Just accept that there will be hackers that think outside of the box, that understand that maybe an elephant looks different than this. As long as there's people doing that and thinking outside of the box, we should apply that same methodology. Just look at your daily work and wonder, what could I do differently? How can I deviate from the actual process? And what impact can I make by doing so? What data am I processing? How can I safeguard this? So, in short, don't panic. Some risks cannot be avoided, so accept them. Just accept that there is a risk, and go to sleep. You cannot prevent everything. If you're really paranoid, just disconnect the internet connection and you'll be a lot safer. And as I mentioned before, just apply the hacker mindset. Think critically and apply it in your daily work. But also be realistic about threats and security. If there's a new vulnerability coming out that applies to systems that you use, read it carefully. Does it really make such an impact in your setup, in your organization, in the way you use the system? And if there's a vendor that tells you, hey, we have 100% security for you, there is no such thing. There will always be snake oil in the industry. But yeah, just be mindful and stay aware. Thank you very much.